Story 1. Encounter at Big Bend National Park. One day, I was working as a camp worker when this happened to me. Other than just me, there was a Navajo guy my age also working. We'll call him Josh. Our job was to look after the horses and campers, make food, and keep the site clean for the next set of campers. The company that we worked for had emergency rifles set up in the trailer that we used, along with 2 guard dogs. The most common visitors that we had were forest rangers. They'd come by periodically every couple of days at least and check on long-term campsites. We were on a first-name basis with these guys and would usually have a pot of coffee waiting for them whenever they rolled through. Working in the wilderness, it's nice to have some sporadic company. It almost makes it feel normal. One night after a long trail ride, we got back to camp only to discover there was a single coyote patrolling it. We watched it from a distance before it saw us and then scurried off. I don't know why, but Josh had this really bad feeling after seeing it. The other workers didn't really seem bothered, but they weren't the ones who had to live on the site 24/7 like we did. Maybe it was just nerves, but both of us had this feeling of being watched that entire evening. Eventually, night came, and we all fell asleep. We woke up to a banging on our door and someone wailing outside. We got up to investigate. Josh checked the blinds, saw it was a camper, and let them in. They came inside, completely terrified. They told us that one of the girls they were with had heard a sound, which sounded like one of her friends outside her tent, only to step on her as she was making her way outside of the tent. That's when the wailing began, which woke all of them up. It apparently had gone on for 20 or so minutes before they came to wake us up. As they were telling us this, the wailing stopped, then promptly started back up in a different spot, much closer to the camp this time. We noticed the dogs were with us, bristling. Not being very brave, we took down the rifles and exited the trailer. We brought the dogs with us, leashed, and let them lead us to the center of camp. From here, you could tell the sound was coming from just beyond the edge of the lantern light, where the area was pitch black. We gathered some of the wood sitting next to us and started the fire back up. That's when it got bad. I've never been more terrified in my life than I was right then. As soon as the wood caught fire, the wailing stopped. The dogs just stood next to us, growling really hard, but their tails were tucked. They knew they were outgunned. I had absolutely no idea what was going on, so I chambered around into my rifle, and my friend followed suit. After that, it went dead quiet, and I mean dead quiet, like no sound being heard whatsoever. I don't know if it was from how scared I was or what, but the next thing I knew, I heard my name being whispered from the tree line to my left. I'll fully admit it, I pissed my pants. It was, and still is, the most terrifying moment of my entire life. I looked at my friend. He was wide-eyed and his face was pale. He was looking between me and where my name had come from, just as terrified as I was, maybe even more. We both backed up closer to the campfire before he took one of the burning branches and hurled it towards the tree stand. At this point, the few campers who had followed us out into the dark were completely losing their minds. A couple of them heard the voice as well and saw us tossing flaming branches into the shadows, rifles raised. They could all tell something was very wrong. I looked back at them for only a second, just in time to see them backpedal into the trailer and then slam the door. Not very cool, but I get it. We heard a weird sound and saw something scurry away, only to have the dogs go completely ballistic. If there was anything left in my bladder at that point, it had come out. Just as I began to take a step forward, I heard another voice. This time it whispered Josh's name from straight ahead. It even said his full name. I looked at my friend, but we were frozen. He pointed at something making its way slowly toward us. He pointed his rifle and fired at it, hitting whatever it was. After the initial shot, We kind of went crazy, firing at whatever made a sound inside that brush. The thing that we saw stalking out of the foliage was tall, person-sized. Everything we thought we saw after that was crawling. We stayed outside the trailer for the rest of that night until the other workers came up. They saw us both tired, still clutching the rifles, and asked what the hell happened. We went over everything, and they went out to investigate. One of them had a radio and contacted the forest rangers. The green truck came bumping out of the forest no more than an hour later. By noon, they came back with 2 dead coyotes. Apparently, what happened was the current set of campers had brought a large amount of meat to grill with, but hadn't properly sealed the containers, attracting the coyote pack. I definitely had some fantastical things going through my brain, ranging from skinwalkers to ghosts. To see the actual creature causing it all was completely surreal. The forest rangers noted the strangest part. One of the coyotes was very clearly dead from the massive bullet hole in its side from one of our rifles. The other coyote, however, didn't have any visible wounds, definitely no bullet holes. Its face was locked in a crazy snarl, and all of its muscles were tense to the point of rigidity. No idea what killed it, like it just dropped dead during the onslaught. Josh was particularly spooked when he saw them and refused to tell me why. I suspect it had something to do with his personal beliefs, possibly Navajo culture, but I don't want to assume. The only thing he told me was that there should be a third corpse, the big standing thing he shot right in the chest, but there was nothing around. Coyotes can't talk. We both heard our names whispered that night. The amount of gore throughout the area was unbelievable. Blood and innards painted the ground, bushes, and even up and down trees. Josh said it looked like something among the pack was fighting them. Maybe that's what actually got them in a frenzy. The rangers took down a report but never got back to us with any more information. Story 2. Arizona roadside encounter. When I was a kid, I worked in Big Bend National Park. We were preparing for a backpacking series presentation for REI, a big event for the company and other outdoorsy organizations, mostly attended by photographers who were going to test equipment and then showcase their own. Our task was to secure a large campsite that met specific parameters. It needed views of the sunrise and sunset, had to be near flowing water, and couldn't have another camper within 3 miles. Big Bend is in the western portion of Texas, dipping down along the bend of the Rio Grande that forms the border with Mexico. It's a mix of high desert, smaller mountains, and has great history, just to give some context. Since we worked in the park, we knew which places were busy, which campsites had better vantage points, and so on. We set out in teams to survey areas and find the best site. Fortunately, it didn't take long, which left us with a free afternoon. REI offered to let us test some of the equipment, but beyond that, we stayed mostly uninvolved. We broke up into groups based on interest. Most people wanted to swim, a couple of guys wanted to fish, and then there was a trail system nearby that I had been meaning to check out. I was hiking near a place we dubbed the Unknown Canyon because of a series of random grave markers found along the canyon floor. Each was chiseled with a single date and the words, "Unknown person" or "Unknown child." It sounds more nefarious than it is. Early roadmakers discovered corpses in the area while digging into the mountainside. Rather than scatter the remains, they carefully relocated them to a beautiful little glen throughout the valley, marking them with stone and mortar headstones. This was long ago, and I'm sure the canyon has a different name now. The area of the park opens up into a comparatively flat section of the basin where the river broadens, and the wildlife tends to be more diverse and obvious. It was a mild, safe area for me to explore with my camera. I didn't have to worry about getting tripped up or needing a free hand. I even snapped a couple of photos of the unknown gravestones I came across. I was several hundred meters away from the ranger truck, which was parked in a designated lot at what passed for our trailhead at the time. This area was open to guests and visitors, but wasn't easily accessed by your average hiker. You needed to know which creek to follow and then which game trail to splinter off. A portion of the descent is almost straight up and down if you don't know how to navigate it properly. So as I approached the river basin near the mouth of the canyon, I saw something really unusual. So unusual, in fact, that it took a few seconds for my brain to sort it out. Something was moving on the other side of the river, and it was big, man-sized, but low to the ground. It shuffled along, and its color made me think it was a group of rabbits, but that was impossible. It was too big. As I moved forward to improve my view, it began to look even stranger. For a second, I thought I was looking at a medium-sized deer doing the worm across the canyon floor. I must be hallucinating, I thought. There were no other options. Only after blinking and refocusing my eyes did I realize what I was seeing. It was a mountain lion, a big cat, creeping along, low slung, hunting something probably no more than a stone's throw from where I was standing. I'd never seen one before, and when the visual information finally parsed, I think my blood froze. Then it looked at me, and I'll probably never forget that moment. You could see the little calorie calculator turn on in its eyes. I've never been so thankful for a river in my entire life. Granted, at this time, and even maybe still, the river was very low due to drought and unauthorized and unlawful irrigation practices upstream. You could likely cross at several points at this location with very minimal risk. It was still quite broad and definitely looked like a potent water barrier, though. The cat did a series of double takes, its head shifting from me to its prey's location and back again rapidly. I could actually see it weighing the risk versus the reward, trying to decide its evening's menu. I died a little inside, but maintained my facing, and began slowly and quietly moving away from it. I did have bear spray on my belt, but I had little to no confidence in it before such a predator. Not sure if I wasn't worth it, or if the river was too much of a factor, or if the big cat just wasn't that into me, but no chase was given. After breaking the line of sight, I was able to get back to the van just fine with no sign of pursuit. That was the longest short walk I've ever taken. Later that night, I was parked off the main park road in an area where big cats commonly hunted. I'll always remember being parked there in the middle of nowhere, munching on slightly stale Oreos and a bottle of water, listening to the occasional growl or scream of a big cat peel out of the darkness, and being thankful for my relatively fortunate position on the food chain. Story 3. Dog mushing in the deep wilderness. I've worked as a pack trip outfitter and ranch hand in the middle of a national forest, spending at least a week each month camping. Nowadays, I do dog mushing, which means I'm outdoors during colder and darker times, venturing further into places where people rarely go. Most people would consider a 25-mile horse trip very long, probably taking all day. I, however, do 40 to 80 miles a day to get the dogs in shape for the Iditarod and Yukon quest. I'm not directly involved with search and rescue or park rangers, but I have volunteered alongside them, spending countless hours assisting in the deep wilderness. I've never met anyone who logs these kinds of miles without encountering or hearing about some unbelievable experiences. It's par for the course, though how much you entertain these stories is up to you. I only believe what I see with my own eyes. The story I'm going to tell you is a two-parter. The first part takes place just past the New Mexican border, into Arizona. I was driving on old county highways, and the sun had just slipped into dusk. The in-between light makes it harder to judge shadows and distances, which is when most accidents happen. I wasn't driving fast, just the speed limit, because I was in the middle of nowhere. If I clipped something, it would be a while before anyone found me, if I even survived. Once the sun was totally gone, I planned to pick up the speed. That's when I saw 5 or 6 elk cows burst onto the road. I slammed on the brakes and swerved all the way off the shoulder, almost colliding with rocks and debris along the road, rather than hit this herd. Colliding with one of those animals is almost a certain death sentence, They stand 6 or 7 feet tall, weigh over 500 pounds, and breed like rabbits in some places. I might survive hitting one, but all five? No way. Luckily for me, I dodged them, but I still almost hit this one elk that was bigger than all the rest. It looked like it was going to hit me straight on and crash through the front windshield, killing me instantly, like what happened to some guy in Deming when he hit a horse. It would be one of the worst deaths I could imagine. Hard, fast, and then being crushed to death, with glass probably shredding me too. I felt this really calm feeling and thought it would be the end. Everything felt slow. I got a good look at it. It's so weird how natural it is to surrender when death feels unavoidable. Many of us imagine we'll go out swinging, but the truth is we accept it when it's coming. The only scary part was that it was looking back at me too. It was about the size of a moose, had no antlers, and the build of a typical female. The other animals were common elk cows, but this one was larger and covered from head to toe in what looked like large gray wool, like an Angora goat that needed shaving so badly it started to look like dreadlocks. By larger, you have to understand the dimensions. An elk can average 500 pounds, but a female moose averages closer to 900. This animal, lumbering along with the herd, was twice the size of any other animal there. The elk were already bigger than my car. No wonder it was so hard to avoid. It literally took up every inch of the 2-lane road I was on. Luckily, I got past it. I saw its head go over the roof of my old Ford Taurus, and then it hit the back of my car. The part I remember best is passing under it because, for one instant, I felt this weird connection with this thing. Like, we knew we were looking at each other despite the dead gray wads of fur hanging in its face. I skidded to a stop and jumped out of the car immediately, despite my better judgment. I stood in awe, needing to see what the hell that thing was. The elk were moving into the tree line, and whatever I saw was right behind them. Everything just disappeared into the brush. I walked back to the front of my car to inspect the place where I hit it, and sure enough, there was a brand new dent in the middle. I leaned on my car with my hands on my head for about 20 minutes, replaying it over and over in disbelief. My friends think it was some kind of Sasquatch, even though I'm certain it had 4 legs. So we'll just call it Bigfoot's horse. My wife says it was probably the spirit of death, and that I died there but continued living in what my mind wants to happen. The second part of the story took place a few miles up the ridge that overlooks Lake Strawberry in Utah. I got to this old aspen grove with really thick aspens on both sides. I mention this because with a string of 12 dogs behind an ATV, as there wasn't enough snow for the sleds, there was really nowhere to go but forward. You couldn't guide the dogs through the trees like that, so it was always forward. Until we got to the end of the loop that would bring us back to the trail, and then back to base camp, which was an exciting thought, because I was usually using a headlamp, and it was late and cold. We'd more than accomplished the route I wanted that day. Now it was just about getting back. Suddenly I saw it again, running on my left side. It was going in the same direction as us, but also toward us at an angle. If we kept going, we would collide. After about 50 yards, I was reminded again of the magnificent power of the moose. This thing was just barreling through 2 or 3 foot snowdrifts like they were nothing. The amount of strength it showed was unreal, and it was matted in that same thick fur as the other one from Arizona. That's the first thing that came to my mind. The other one I saw was a few years before, and roughly 900 miles away. There's no way I was looking at the same creature I saw in the Arizona backcountry. This was a different thing up here in the Utah high country. I wish I would have grabbed a camera, but I was caught up in the franticness of watching my dogs to make sure they didn't chase it. In dog mushing, you can never take your eyes off your leader too long, or something can go terribly wrong. To stop the team would make them for sure go toward it and get caught in the trees. So really the best thing you can do is just go faster, keep the dogs busy so they don't chase. This also meant I might put some distance between myself and whatever the hell that thing was. It was still crashing through snowbanks and branches as it galloped through the tundra. There were only 25 yards between us and a few sparse trees, bare of any leaves or cover, so I was looking at it and at the pack leader ahead of the team. A fallen tree or a cattle guard taken too fast can injure a dog. I reached into my emergency bag and pulled out my just-in-case gun, a 6-shot .357 revolver with buffalo bore cartridges. I clicked off the first 2 chambers I keep empty and had the gun pointed straight up in the air with live ammo now. I really didn't want to shoot it or even frighten the dogs with a gunshot, but it kept getting closer. So I fired a shot a few feet above it and heard the bullet hit some branches. I looked back at the dogs just as I did that and saw it go behind a thick grove of trees in my periphery. I kept looking around, but that was the last I saw of it. For the rest of the ride, I was jumping at shadows. As a hunter, dog sledder, and volunteer search and rescue guide, I still don't know what to make of it. It's got 4 legs and what looks like decades worth of coat growth. It doesn't need to be able to see to move. It shouldn't exist, yet I've seen it twice. Pretty crazy, but the craziest thing was that tiny moment I thought, oh, it's death again, but this time he's gonna take me for sure.